Hello, welcome back to the Lick of the Week videos. This is part 2 in the new series where I'm basically expanding the Lick of the Week topic of chord groupings from years back. The previous video we added another blues chord to our standard group of shapes that we identify with a certain chord progression for the key that you're playing in. And I'm going to stay in the key of G for this video and talk about more changes that go outside the normal context of the key. So we already know that in the key of G, the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, the 5, the 6, the 7, we've already identified the more common changes. Some of the chords are major and some of them are minor. But because of an influence of ragtime music, which if you don't know much about ragtime, you can look that up, some of the chord progression changes in ragtime, have a certain characteristic kind of cadence, kind of changes. And folk music, like bluegrass, just like most modern kinds of music, were made up of bits and pieces of older genres of music. So bluegrass is no different. Folk music, rock, country, you'll hear songs that have these more what I call ragtime changes. So an example would be, I would think, I'm going to use kind of like a classic example that a bluegrass player might encounter as a bluegrass song that's actually more of a ragtime tune, Salty Dog Blues. So if we do Salty Dog in the key of G, you'll see right away that some of the changes don't correspond to the chords you think are going to happen for the key of G. So let's start with the tune. Sitting down, if I can think of the lyrics. Let me be your salty dog, I will be your man and all. Honey, let me be your salty dog. So that's a bit of the chorus, once I could remember the tune. So you notice right away that there's some kind of odd changes. Instead of some of the normal chords that we've talked about in our progression for the key of G, you have an E major, you have an A major. So there are two that really don't belong in the key of G. And again, just like the blues chord in the previous video, the B flat major, these chord changes don't actually belong in the key of G, but they are tied together in a ragtime kind of progression. And I won't get too involved in the theory aspect, but part of the ragtime sound in as far as chord changes go is secondary dominance, which you can look up, but follows the circle of fifths in that all keys are related by the fifth of each key. So that's the whole reason for the circle of fifths diagram. It kind of shows that all keys are related by the 5 chord in each key. So if you backpedal or reverse engineer this a little bit, G is our 1 chord. E major is not a normal chord for the key of G. We know it's supposed to be E minor, right? Because the 6th note of the G scale is E. And if you harmonize that with the other notes of the G scale, 1, 3, 5, you get a minor chord, not major. So E major is not in the key of G. But E is the 5 of the key of A. We know A is not in the key of G normally. It should be A minor, right? G, A, B, C, D, F, G. The A chord, if you harmonize it, gives you an A minor. But this is an A major. But the E and the A are related by fifths, okay? A is the 5th of the key of D. But now D is in the key of G. It's the 5 chord. And what does that relate back to? Back to G. So what happens in a lot of these ragtime tunes is you have this real common thing that's a circle of fifths, 5 of 5, secondary dominance, whatever you want to call it, is you'll actually backpedal and you'll go into another key, a couple of keys actually, and you'll tie keys together as a change for the key that you're in. So from G to E, E is the 5 of A is the 5 of D, and D goes back to G. So again, what you're doing is you're substituting a chord that you normally expect to hear. So normally you would hear an A minor, but there are a ton of folk songs that go from G to A, and I could go on and on and on with typical bluegrass songs, country songs, even rock songs, blues songs that might go from G to A. And again, that's I think if you listen to how those chords are used, you'll hear that that's kind of a direct influence from the ragtime era in there. Now some people might write a song and just say, I want to go from G to A major because I like the sound of it and I don't know anything about ragtime. You know, so again, theoretically you try to explain why something sounds the way it does, and you can use a bunch of theory terms to explain it, like the 5 of 5, secondary dominance. But in the end, sometimes people may choose a chord change because they just like the sound of it. So regardless of how you want to look at this, theoretically or just with your ear, it's pretty easy to recognize ragtime changes like that. And even if you don't want to call that a ragtime change, you can just say, I recognize those set of chords because they have a certain feel to them. And if you notice, they do lead you back around to where you started. So it's a circle fifths. So the tension builds up, but it brings you right back to where you started. And again, there's a bunch of songs like I Know What It Means to Be Lonesome. Well, I know what it means to be lonesome. I know what it means to be blue. I know what it means to be lonesome in dreams. There's no one there with you. So it's, you know, different lyrics, but basically the exact same chord progression as Salty Dog. And again, even if you heard a song that just went from G to C to D, 1, 4, 5, and then all of a sudden you heard an A major 2. Again, if you don't want to think ragtime at all, you can just forget anything I said about ragtime, and you could just get used to what it sounds like to go from 1 to another 2 chord, a major 2. Okay, so some of the changes to look out for are G to E, or 1 to 6, but the 6 will be major, or 1 to 2, where the 2 is major. And again, it doesn't matter how you want to classify this in your mind, just find those chords because they're always going to be in your group. So I can go from G to A, it's only 2 frets higher. If I go from G to a major 2 in a progression, then all I have to do is slide my 1 chord up 2 frets. Just like the 7 chord, the flatted 7 we use because it's, you know, a bluesy change. That's always the root shape move down 2. So a major 2 chord in your progression would just be 2 frets higher with the same shape. Now we're talking about the F-shaped group only here. And if you wanted to go from a 1 to a 6, which typically would be like G to E minor, say Foggy Mountain Breakdown would be a classic example in bluegrass of 1 to 6. You know, Foggy Mountain Breakdown. You know, you go to E minor. So if you're playing rhythm, you know, you go to E minor because that's the naturally occurring 6th chord in your progression for the key of G. But you'll hear songs that go to E major, and typically in a folk situation they all tie together because, again, don't sound like a broken record, but they do tend to want to go back to the original key by the circle of fifths. Not always, but that's a typical approach. But sometimes you will hear songs that have a chord change where it's just maybe 1 altered chord that you're not used to hearing. So G to A is a common change that if you listen to a lot of bluegrass and you play it, listen to a lot of rock, country, that's a really change. Major 2 is a normal change. Okay, now there's another change that you'll hear that's not quite as common, but it's not, you know, totally unusual, is a major 3. Now in the previous video, we talked about a blues 3, which is, you know, wherever your index finger is located, you make a bar chord there in the F-shaped group, and it's just basically 2 frets away from, you know, where your shape starts. But a major 3 would be an example of replacing B minor, G, A, B, and if we take the B note from the G scale, make a chord out of it, we get a minor chord. But you will hear songs that have a major 3. So again, that's another oddball change that you'll hear. And for a folk music example, I'll use the old Dillard song, you know, from the 60s, The Old Home Place. And again, don't pay attention to my terrible singing. It's been 10 long years since I left my home in the hollow where I was born. where the cool fall nights and the wood smoke rise, and the fox hunter blows his horn. And does another verse like that. Okay, right away you have one curveball thrown to you. You have G to B major. And again, there's not supposed to be a G major in the key of A when you're talking about the classical approach to harmonizing notes of the scale, making chords. But there it is. And again, there's theoretical reasons why it ties in. If you want to investigate that, you can. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time in the video getting heavily into theory. But it's only a half step lower than your 4 chord. So you can actually take that B minor chord that you would play here, and you can make a bar chord at the same fret location. So instead of the 4th fret looking like this, you basically move your 2nd string up 1 fret, and there you have a B major. And in the chorus of this song, I like to use this song as an example because it also has a major 2 in the chorus. So here's the chorus. It starts on the 5 chord for the chorus. What have they done? 1, to the old home place, major 2. Why did they tear it down? Now back to the original progression, but we're still in the chorus. And why did I, major 3, leave the plow in the field and work job in the town? So the chorus has that kind of ragtime 2 thing going on, and the verse has that major 3. So those are some really common changes that you'll hear, and again, it's pretty common in a lot of these folk bluegrass tunes and country songs because of that influence from ragtime. But it's also crept into rock and pop and, you know, all kinds of music. So add those to your chord grouping, a major 2, a major 6, and a major 3, and you'll have a much more expansive group of chords that apply to a larger body of chord progressions. And again, if you move this up to any key, like if I move that song up to the key of A, the spatial relationship on your fretboard is going to be exactly the same. The shapes work the same in a group. So if I moved Old Home Place up to A, it's been 10 long years since I left my home in the hollow where I was born. Chorus, 5 chord. What have they done to the old home place? Major 2. Why did they tear it down? 5. Now back around to the second half of the chorus. And why did I leave my plow in the field and look for a job in the town? So you can again move this chord grouping like a slide rule. You can slide it up down the neck. The F shape locates the 1 chord, and then all these other chords that we're talking about can work for that. So that'll wrap up this video. And in the next few videos, we're going to talk about chord groupings for minor key songs. That's something that we haven't talked about at all in the Lick of the Week videos. It's one of those things, for some reason, I just never got around to expanding on as far as chord groups go. So we're going to take the chord group idea and apply it to playing songs in minor keys. So those will come up sometime later when I have time to make the videos. But chew on these couple of videos for a while, and then we'll expand that and go into minor keys next time. Thank you very much. Have a good one.